Cisco Heat, A Strange Man to Meet, and cover games on repeat. It's January 1992, and this is Yesterzine. 66 episodes in, it's not often I discover a new magazine, and yet this month there were two. A couple of months ago you may have seen the tie-in magazine for TV series Bad Influence. That lasted all of 2 issues, and I asked if anyone knew a single issue magazine, which prompted the intelligent and sexy viewers of this channel to go looking. No confirmed single issue magazines, at least ones that were supposed to be multi-issue. Craig Charlesworth remembered one printed on newsprint, but we can't find a name for it, and maybe you can help Craig out because he's starting to think it's some sort of fever dream. In magazines that definitely existed though, he remembered one I did not. Saturn Plus, the sibling to Play, a magazine which in its second incarnation still runs today. Saturn Plus did less well. Craig remembered just 2 issues several months apart, and while he's right there, it crawled to a full 7 over the next year before being put out of all of our misery. Issue 5's cover is bad enough it'll demand an episode just on that basis. Which means we turn elsewhere. David Milcreast comes up trumps. If I said Commodore Power to you, then you're going to immediately think of last month's episode about a Commodore magazine called Power. But no, that's Amiga Power, and this legally distinct tome is Commodore Power, a C64 only magazine that inexplicably launched after Amiga Power. It doesn't quite take the crown with 3 issues, but it does have a heck of a story behind it, and you'll never guess the magazine that's going to get mentioned during it. We need to flip through this issue too, because there's a surprise lurking within. But there's still time for games, of course. We'll play a game I keep mistaking for Chase HQ, and we'll take the chance to see how, at the height of the cover tape wars, a new player enters the game. But first, Jalek Outrun. It'll make sense in a minute.
Hold on, man.
I was a Spectrum kid, and as such, this show is guilty of bagging on the C64 fairly often. Of course, this is mostly in jest. The C64 was an immensely capable machine for its time, and it's fair to say it was probably more widely successful than either of the 2 obvious popular contenders. Plus, it was the only one Poundland Branson never got his hands on. Even die-hard defenders of the beige box with even beiger games would have to admit though, it often got a raw deal with arcade racing games. We saw a classic years ago on this channel. Chase HQ, a game which CVG issue 100 gave 97% on CPC. This is the CPC version you're watching now. The C64 one, reviewed in the same issue, 36%. It's difficult to say why based on the screenshots on the box. That looks pretty great for a C64 game. Almost suspiciously so, in fact. And of course you're with me even before you note the screenshots taken from multiple formats disclaimer. Here's what the C64 version actually looks like. Even taking into account that the C64 always felt colour should be seen and not heard, that is astonishingly awful. It's ugly, it's catastrophically slow, and that engine note is banned by the Geneva Convention. There's no real reason for it. For a random example, Trailblazer was running like this years earlier, but it seems common with the genre. WEC Le Mans suffered similarly. The Spectrum version is a bit monochrome sure, but it blats along very nicely and everything is in proportion. The C64 one is slow, somehow uglier, appears to have the circuit created in a secondary Escher dimension, and this is without me being able to make you feel how badly it handles. But this month in Commodore Power, another chance. And like both the above, another arcade conversion. This time it's Jaleco's answer to Outrun. See, I told you it'd make sense. Cisco Heat is not, as you might initially assume, a game about keeping vital backbone network equipment cool during air conditioning failure. But actually a point-to-point racer where you are a police car racing other police cars. Which seems ill-advised. Supposedly this is some organised competition, but if so, you'd think it might have been a good idea to tell the locals. Netgear Warmth has a good pedigree. It's by a recently acquired company called Bitbox, consisting largely of people who'd worked on Sega's finest, and had most recently been responsible for official Dudley guilty pleasure Big Run, for what was about to be their new owners. The arcade game too attracted praise, considered one of Jaleco's best. I can see why, at least in context. We're basically at the end of what they call sprite scaling races, before the likes of Virtua Racing started to make stuff properly 3D, and that endgame is clear. Cisco Heat is of course set in and around San Francisco, and from the arcade you wouldn't need me to tell you that. It's full of recognisable landmarks of one sort or another. You can choose one of them fancy foreign Nissans if you want your car to be capable of turning, or a traditional US-style barge-mobile if you want the accelerator to immediately catapult you into the next time zone. I'm joking for slightly xenophobic effect there, really. There is that difference between the cars, but it's marginal. The USP of Cisco Heat is in those tracks, particularly breaking up the point-to-point racing with 90-degree junctions you have to position the car for, and are very tricky to get right. The game isn't perfect. Those 90-degree junctions are partly why. The lack of visibility means that even if you get them right, there might be AI or scenery of some description waiting for you on your line, and there's no chance to avoid them. This seems largely deliberate. Whereas Outrun emphasised the open road, most of Cisco Heat is enclosed and difficult and windy. The idea is fine, but the game can't quite handle it in places. The visibility leaves a lot of what you do to luck. It's fun though. It's a mad 5 minutes every time you play it, and that's exactly what an arcade game should be. And for the time, the effect of those hills, that terrain, that sense of place is remarkable. It's even got a recognisable version of Lombard Street, whose name you might not know, but an external picture will probably make you say, "Huh." The problem is already clear. This is a difficult conversion. To pull it off, you need to retain as much of that scenery as possible, make the junctions work, keep the sense of speed, have the enclosed racing feel come across, and of course add some sort of depth that justifies you charging £15 for this on disc in 1991. Get it right though, and the C64 arcade racer market is way open, and this could be... oh, bollocks. So while you take some of this in, I'll reveal Commodore Power stretched to a full 62% for this, and that's about 63% too generous. It's one of those weird reviews that doesn't seem to review the game. It spends 2/3 of its runtime doing exactly what I just did, namely telling you about the arcade game, and then basically sums it up as being crap for 2 paragraphs. Then gives it a score well above average. So let's do what they didn't and start itemising some of the faults here. For a start, you can all see that frame rate. You've got plenty of time to do so. If I say it's 3 frames a second, I'm being generous. Your mum updates her subscription-based website more often than this game does the screen. It's not like it's spending that time on pretty graphics either. You can always tell a game that isn't confident in its illusion of movement when it resorts to striping the road. And speaking of that road, all the on-road furniture is gone. No trams and tracks, no parked cars, no barriers, nothing really to the side either. This could be in a desert rather than San Francisco and look exactly the same, despite it bravely announcing locations like Fisherman's Wharf like it matters. The other cars have a massive sprite bounding box, like your C64 has suddenly developed its own form of attribute clash, and they're horribly out of proportion. The game occasionally attempts to pretend to have hills, but every time it does, the opposing cars quadruple in size for no reason anyone can tell. There is traffic, other than your opponents, but it's just copy-pastes of the same van, all of which cause you to roll and then continue at 100 miles an hour. They're pretty much worth ignoring though, because the collision detection works when it feels like it, rather than anything relating to contact with your rivals. Except at the start, where you'll bounce off them constantly trying to obtain the 100 miles an hour where it makes sense to change gear. Or at least, press the gear change button for a 50-50 chance of changing gear. And then another 50-50 chance it belatedly does it just as you give up and press the button again, at which point it immediately changes up and down again. All of which you can only judge by glancing at the status display at the top, because there are no engine noises whatsoever, just a tune so repetitive Daft Punk would have asked them if they could mix it up a bit. Those opponents also defy physics. I was blatting along at full speed in the police car, the only one to make this version, and towards the end of the stage I went from 1st to 7th. Thankfully, despite this supposedly being a racing game rather than a time trial one, your position does not matter even a tiny bit if you make the finish. The 90-degree turns from the arcade technically remain, but you have to go so slowly to reliably take them, it's actually quicker to just gun it into them, roll, and be automatically put heading the right way again, which looks like straight on because the game world is realised so badly it can't actually show you the turn properly. Which leaves me only the game's best feature to talk about. It's only 5 short stages, one really very short. I didn't realise there were gears for the first half of the first one, and topped out at 100 miles an hour. I went in knowing none of the mechanics and tricks I've just given you. I finished the whole thing on my first go. There are no difficulty levels, and just to cap it all off, the endgame screen was corrupted. That last bit could be the specific cracked version I'm using, and I am absolutely not going to play another 15 minutes of this to check. Here it is from the World of Long Plays playthrough I checked to make sure this whole thing wasn't some kind of incredibly late April Fool's joke on me. Which makes the review especially weird because there are multiple lower scores in the issue. Most notably Domark's Rugby World Cup game, predecessor to Amiga Power 2% awarded International Rugby Challenge, getting 40, and a refreshing separate tape rating for the cycles to reflect how awful the multi-load is. My theory is they committed to it for the cover, then realised they had an absolute pup and desperately searched for a way to make that clear, without completely panning the game they've just splashed over the cover of their brand new magazine. Others weren't so kind. Zap gave it 30%, Commodore Format 12%, and when Zap's successor Commodore Force re-reviewed it for a coin-op roundup, they reduced that to just 7. That's a bit more like it. The search for a good C64 arcade racer continues. Force suggests Continental Circus just next door. Maybe next time I'll try that. So what possesses a company to launch a new Commodore 64 magazine in late 1991? After all, Future's Commodore Format is considered a late entry, and that's over a year older than this one. The much more famous Power Mag, covering a much later machine, is 6 months older. The first answer is it doesn't possess a company to do so. Commodore Power is the brainchild of one man, Rick Henderson. Avid Games Master viewers may remember him from the mid to late era of that show. Before that though, he was a magazine editor. Brief stints at Games Week and Amstrad Computer User led to him somehow blagging his way into the editorship of a C64 magazine called Your Commodore in the middle of 1989 at the age of just 19. He was credited as deputy for a few months, possibly for this reason. Rick's impact was near immediate. For its first half-decade, Your Commodore was very much a serious magazine that covered a few games. This is the last pre-Rick issue, August 1989. It vaguely mentions reviewing some games on both C64 and PC, since Commodore produced some of the IBM compatibles. The lead story is very much related to creative creating on an Amiga. Each individual game review is considered a feature, and the index includes the most important public information that the video game Speedball is not for ladies. So make sure you don't play that one if you consider yourself in that category. I can't tell you why it would be, the review doesn't mention it. Rick arrives, and the next cover is unambiguously 100% games, mostly centred around 2 huge licenses in Batman and James Bond. Games have been massively pushed to the fore in the contents page too. In his first editor's letter, Rick doesn't overtly give away the focus change to gaming, billing it as tying in with Batman, the Tim Burton movie being new in cinemas, as a whole. He merely calls it a brighter future while assuring readers the machine-based columns are now in a section on their own, which will in no way make them easier to get rid of in, say, 4 months' time? So anyway, 3 months later in the December issue, the transformation is well in progress. The cover is very much about games, again a big license in the form of Ghostbusters 2 dominates, although so does Batman again. The game is ready for review, and they give a game that comes up in every classics discussion and all but launched the Amiga 56%. I've not played the C64 version, so maybe you can tell me if it fluffs the landing, but interesting. Different worlds, of course, but that's worse than they gave Cisco Heat. Inside, the focus shift is near complete. The Your Programmer section, as was dubbed, is confined to a pull-out section that isn't mentioned anywhere else in the mag. Rick, though, clearly liked the concept of the pull-out. We'll see it again soon. In the editor's letter, the inevitable has happened. This is the last month for the programmer coverage, and they're not even trying to hide they'll become 100% entertainment. In an interview with the excellent Commodore Format archive, on which I'm relying heavily for the backstory and urge you to click the description link to read, Rick admits this was basically the plan all along.
When I took over Your Commodore, it was mainly a serious magazine with listings and articles about home working and the like. It wasn't really my cup of tea, but I did my best to keep it ticking over for the existing readers. However, I was personally more into mags like Zap64, Your Sinclair and Sinclair User, and had friends working at them, so I was always nagging the publisher to consider a switch. Eventually they caved, not least because the more serious mags were no longer garnering the readership they used to.
And so 1990 launches with the rebrand. It was very literally the 90s, so Your Commodore became YC, somewhat appropriately with its 64th issue. Which is another, perhaps even bigger change Rick hadn't mentioned. Your Commodore covered the 64 and 128, but also the Plus 4, Amiga, and as mentioned, IBM PC games on the justification that Commodore made compatible machines. YC is 64 and, nominally, 128 only. Although given that machine was now out of production, we should probably assume it to be a magazine for the C64 games that 128 could also run. And it really is games now. 6 months earlier, a review of a game was considered a feature. Now there's 13 of them, plus all the usual budget reviews, tips, etc. There's also one other item you've probably skipped over because you think it was usual, but it really wasn't. Rick again.
It was the start of the days of the cover-mounted tapes. Your Sinclair was the first to have one regularly, I seem to remember, and no C64 mag had done it yet.
CFA have done the investigative legwork for me here. Rick's right. We're at the start of the cover tape wars, where increasing numbers of free full games on the front of magazines would both delight their buyers and do such damage to the sales of software, publishers would club together to effectively ban it for the 16 bits just 18 months later. YC launches that era for the 64 aggressively. As Rick promises in the editor's letter, the cassette is here to stay. And it's so free that free is in capital letters, and I'm sure the price rise of 50% from the previous month is just a coincidence. It's an aggressive one, containing 4 complete games. That's worth digging into though. It starts promisingly. Both Finders Keepers and Kentilla from Virgin Mastertronic were Zap Sizzlers on original release, but both cost £2 4 years earlier. The other 2 though, they admit, were previously published in CDU. CDU is sister magazine Commodore Disk User, and having looked through the entire run of that magazine in a throwaway attempt to provide local colour, I can tell you it's an issue from exactly 1 year earlier. So those at least may not have been new to YC readers. Still though, it's more than any other magazine was doing at the time, and even ignoring those, you've just got 2 new 90% rated games for £2. The cheapest actual game reviewed in this issue is £3, and less good. But we're 1100 words in and we still not really mentioned the actual magazine we're supposed to be focusing on. But we have. Because Your Commodore was about to become the magazine that refused to die. It had already survived a new editor and a complete change of focus, but that was just the start. Owners Argus Specialist Press were not a computing publisher. They'd just somehow ended up with the 2 we've mentioned and another one called Your Amiga. Despite Rick's rebrand and New Era leadership, 6 months later they decided to shut down all 3 magazines. Issue 69 for June 1990 was the last one. There was no YC for July. But there was for August.
Another small company up the road, Alpha Vitae, decided to purchase all 3 magazines to continue them, and hired me as group editor of the trio.
Huzzah! The bold new exciting future of YC is assured.
Sadly, the company itself ended up going bankrupt.
Bugger. It did last a year at Alpha Vitae though, which brings us to September 1991 and how we get to Commodore Power. Because even the loss of a second publisher couldn't kill YC. at least spiritually.
Myself and Jeff Davey, who had taken over editorship of YC by then, decided that shouldn't be the end of it, and tried to purchase the YC Your Commodore name to take it elsewhere. Unfortunately, the administrator wanted too much, so we decided to launch our own replacement from scratch, in partnership with the owner of Lime Lizard, a popular indie music magazine that we were both also writing for at the time.
And in many ways, Commodore Power issue 1 absolutely is YC issue 84. If I just pop up the news page, there's half a chance you won't be able to tell immediately which is which, both being hosted by the presumably self-styled Bevy Babes, news editor Beverly Gardner. Other sections, like the letters page, are mostly carried over as well. Rick named himself and Jeff above, but the entire regular staff came across, including Bev, Rick, Jeff, and staff writers Richard Taylor and Jason Miller, although the latter only gets a contributor credit. Which is the thing about CP. It's a true independent. It's basically a very ambitious fanzine. While they have that partnership with Lime Lizard, that's a one-magazine band itself, CP carrying a house ad for its sister title. As Rick himself points out, the designer makeover to at least partly distance CP from YC is all him. And he was heavily influenced by the general aesthetic of Futures magazines at the time. He's not wrong. If I put CP and AP together and told you CP was the magazine that became AP, only those who knew I was lying would guess I was lying. The logo is best described as legally distinct, and the white, red and blue colour scheme and general layout almost identical. In this respect, Commodore Power is something of a halfway house. Rick is trying, mostly successfully, to emulate the new era led by Future of full-colour, marginally more grown-up magazines. But as he admits himself, they couldn't afford full colour, and thus elements of their design, and writing, are back in the 80s era of comic-like magazines. It works for them. The majority of its slim, but sadly average for the period 68 pages, are just a very decent magazine you'd be perfectly happy to buy for your machine. I say most of it, because having taken over YC and spending a lot of effort turning it into a games magazine, Rick launched his own magazine, and then tried to turn that into not even entirely a computing one. If you were around this show a few years back, you'll remember your Sinclair launching an awful lifestyle section as the games dried up for the machine, including a dating advice section. I've never quite decided if the whole thing was satire or just awful. This is 5 months earlier than that, and as you've probably guessed, Power goes for the same. Rick renewing his use of a pull-out section to present Big Thrills. It's a very different prospect to the YS attempt. For a start, there's no actual lifestyle here. This is strictly about other media. Films, music, video in the sense of home VHS releases, and comics. It's not for lack of things to write about either. There are nearly 20 full-price game reviews in this issue that could have made use of those 8 pages. It was a conscious decision by the editors.
Jeff was at the time taking band and gig photos for the NME and other music mags, plus we were both writing for all manner of lifestyle outlets. We also knew a few bands of the time, such as Dodgy and EMF, and ran our own indie music club night. I hung around with the owners of Mega City Comics in Camden too, where we lived and pretty much produced the mag from, so our own interest ended up spilling into the magazine.
Fair enough. So what was the big non-games media news at the end of 1991? A new comic shop in Soho. A brave choice for a magazine to focus on a physical location its non-London readers would probably never see. Top 10 Comics was interesting though. Backed by celebrities Paul Gambaccini and Jonathan Ross, they swiped their absurdly young manager Zoe Urchin from the behemoth Forbidden Planet just down the road. The look of both Zoe and the premises itself screams comic book shop in 2024, but in 1991, Top 10 stood out. Commodore Power turns up on a day artist Jamie Hewlett is signing everything in sight. But what they don't mention is Jamie was also responsible for the shop's whole look, and probably a lot of them since, contrasting nicely with Forbidden Planet, which has always been a bit sterile. I ascribed such influence to a small indie comic shop at least partially, because if you watched enough MTV, it might well be familiar as the location for a lot of their early interviews. You might also be wondering why you know the name Jamie Hewlett. Well, is this familiar at all?
I ain't happy, I'm feeling glad I got sunshine in a bag.
According to legend, Graham Coxon, guitarist of Blur, was a fan of Hewlett's other big creation, Tank Girl, and he'd asked Hewlett to interview the band for the magazine he wrote for, Deadline. Hewlett met Blur frontman Damon Albarn for the first time that day. They ended up living together after well-timed relationship breakups, and 6 years later, Gorillaz was born. By then, sadly, Top 10 was gone, lasting only until 1995 thanks to a bad market and worse lease deal. I found that bit out from Zoe's own website, which mostly covers her very successful later DJ career. In her own history article, she highlights without source exactly one article on the shop. This one. Making it, I suspect, the single most viewed page Commodore Power would ever publish. The main film review is Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Excellent! But otherwise, it slightly skirts the true mainstream. Even Bill and Ted take second place on the page to the VHS release of the then much less famous Akira. The main music interview is with the Franken Walters, who were an upcoming indie outfit who wouldn't see their mainstream chart entry for another year. That number 11 single, After All, is the only time they've troubled the UK Top 40. But they're still going, and that's rather the point of this section, where, with the extremely notable exception of the Charlatans, they've gone for bands you otherwise wouldn't hear about in the UK. Franken Walters are Irish. Ratcat are Australian. Ratcat have never made waves here, but they've got 3 number 1s in their native country. The same occurs for the audiovisual. A home release of Dances with Wolves is reviewed, but they devote 3 times that space to talking about 30-year-old TV shows. I'm still not sure this section should be here, especially in a magazine with limited space and still plenty of Commodore Power to be covering, but at least it's going to be telling you things you wouldn't find anywhere else. We don't really know if the experiment would be successful, and if Rick was right that,
had we continued beyond the 3 issues, we would have gained an underground-style readership.
Because you already know they didn't. It wasn't a sales issue though. They were strung along with excuses by the owner of their new publishing company, and ultimately were never paid for any of the 3 issues produced. Unsurprisingly, Lime Lizard itself followed CP into extinction soon after. At the 4th attempt then, the world finally succeeded in killing your Commodore. The personal financial system caused by this meant Rick and the gang had to take proper paying work and couldn't try to find a new home. Rick, of all places, ended up at Bella. Not for long though, because Commodore Power was able to look after its creator one last time. The slightly wider remit of the mag meant in issue 2 they devoted a couple of pages to an attempt to get video games onto television, in the form of a little show called Games Master. Rick himself interviewed the presenter, the then unknown Dominic Diamond. With the help of a couple of other contacts, Rick ended up doing work for Games Master as a researcher, becoming mates with Dom, and becoming a bigger and bigger part of the show itself. Rick's still in journalism. He's news editor at T3.com, where you'll find him posting regularly, and writing exactly as many articles on programming the C64 as he did 35 years ago. We've done the magazine, but since we've already established that Rick and the team were the pioneers of cover tapes for the C64, we can't leave without seeing what their own venture could offer. So let's make like a goldfish on games and cover disc face-off this. In a weird revisiting of history, just like your Commodore, the tape contains 4 games and an original game that wasn't. Firstly though, let's deal with the 2 former commercial games, both from Prism Leisure, although I immediately know that's not going to be the whole story. Prism's business model was generally buying up any old crap and re-releasing it. They launched a $2.99 budget range for the Amiga not long after this, whose average review mark was basically a Wilhelm scream. They had a range called 5+1 for budget compilations that really should have been called 1+5 because they were all one credible game, in this case the 7 years old F-15 Strike Eagle 2 from Microprose, and 5 games fished out of the back of the dumpster behind Midas's office. My favourite of these is a disc of shareware versions, also bundled with an old Microprose release, because the marketing department really should have re-proofread the name 50 Great Games plus Knights of the Sky. The point here is twofold. Firstly, that we need to dig deeper to find out where these games came from, and secondly, that I am not filled with confidence about their quality. That feeling is not dispelled by finding out Nexus was published by Nexus, and while one of the German magazines went nutso over it, both Commodore User and Zap gave it exactly 50%. The premise here is to break into a secret research facility to get the answers to 32 questions about the drug ring that owns it. This involves finding 4 pieces of information for each of the rumours, items like who is the commander, where are the drugs stored in the USA, and when the next shipment is. And also who funds the drug ring, to which I assume the answer is drugs fund it, otherwise why did they build a multi-level volcano base? We're not here for a full review, so we'll skip to the chase. This is Impossible Mission, Dull Edition. You have an insider to escort you in. You immediately have a pass to the entire base. Most of the intel is just on easily accessible computer terminals, and no one will attack you. Maybe if you get deeper it's more interesting, and there's certainly enough of a time sink here that 10-year-old me would probably have got lost in it as a cover tape game, but it's an almighty dull experience now, and Zap considered it so even then. The review focusing as much on novelty packaging, Commodore Power obviously didn't have, than the game itself. Me? The only excitement was when I forgot I had a stun gun equipped and inadvertently pissed off everyone. Our other Prism game is Eraser, so at least it probably won't be the worst one of those we'll play today. Street Machine is from the short-lived Software Invasion, who did absolutely nothing else I recognise, and I'm distracted from pondering further by noticing that ASM, who gave Nexus 95, chopped 40 off that for this. Perhaps I've gaslit myself with the true awfulness of Cisco Heat, because I don't see that here. It's not great, mind, and even in 1987, charging 12 actual quid for this on disc would have been hilarious. Taken as a cover tape freebie though, it's a very different prospect. It presents as an arcade driving game, but you try that, and you will be instantly dead on the unforgiving scenery. In fact, one tap here is probably going to be enough to end your race, and despite the slowness, there is physics. The car does slide if you try and tip it into a corner at full speed. The enemy cars absolutely get in the way, especially at the start, but they do spread out. Embarrassingly, Commodore Power, as your Commodore, gave this 3 out of 10 on original release, which is nearly twice Zap's mark. And that's not unfair. But in this context, yeah, I'd have lost time to this. A perfectly nice inclusion. An easy winner of Best Racing Game of the episode. The first of our 2 credited to a single person is The Perils of Bear George by Kevin Williamson, which did get a commercial release through Cheetahsoft as early as 1983, but remains Kevin's only known video game credit. But before we go there, I'm playing these from original releases since I couldn't find the CP tape, and look at this. 1983. Got to be one of the world's first cracktros. The game itself barely got a better reception than Street Machine. At a then full price £7, it got a universal 2 out of 5 from all 3 magazines alive to review it. It feels like a reasonable type-in, to be honest. It's in 3 parts, but I only managed to see 2 of them. First, you need to eat as many apples as possible throughout the year. The game doesn't appear to gate progress at all, because my first go I didn't know you had to press up to eat. Which is good, because it's laughably slow and ponderous. You really don't need the squirrels dropping nuts on you. It seems to build you up stamina to use on the next section, which is just walk left to right and hope a skier doesn't hit you. It is equally slow, and eventually a truck comes along to take you to the zoo for some reason, at which point you get put right back to the start, which seems mean. But then they were selling you a 3-level game for £7 in 1983, so they've got to string it out somehow. It's clearly filler on this tape though, and I can't believe by 1992 that anyone was looking at this twice. I doubt I will. The last game is the interesting one. CP described Frosty the Snowman as being by their very own Richard Taylor, and of course this much is correct. We already saw Richard was a staff writer on YC and here. In fact, he hands 90% to Battle Command just over the page. And this is the original game that wasn't, because all of this wouldn't have been news to the regular readers of your Y Commodore C Power. I looked into the game. The original publisher was Alpha Vitae, which if you've been paying too much attention, you'll recognise as the middle of the 3 homes for this magazine. It doesn't take much more digging to find out Commodore Power's seasonal cover mount for Christmas 1991 had been YC's seasonal cover mount for Christmas 1990. Here it is in the disc pages of issue 75, alongside 2 other games that had previously appeared in Commodore Disk User. Not a huge point subscribing to both magazines then. It might be older than that. On Lemon 64, a user called Richman, who might even be Richard, suggests it was written in 1984 and rediscovered in 1990. If so, it's technically credible. It's considerably faster than Bear George and actually works out to be a semi-decent head-to-head platformer. It's difficult, predictably. I've not managed to retrieve a present yet. It also pulls nasty tricks like having pits immediately in a new screen, which will only fool you once, but will always fool you once. Still, if we regard this as a little bonus, it's a nice enough one, assuming you hadn't played it a year earlier. And hey, how many video game journalists have written better games? It's amazing though that we have games that originally sold for a total of about £30 on a £2 magazine. You can see why the cover tape wars, which were all but over by this point, were so damaging to the 8-bit software market. And if we're being honest, this was not the best tape of the month either. Zap had Paradroid and Rainbow as full games, and Spy vs Spy 3 was a better 2-player idea than Frosty. Yes, that's only 3 games alongside a demo of Double Dragon 3, but you're getting more playtime out of that demo than Bear George. Commodore Format reviewed it this month and gave it a perfectly respectable 78%. Speaking of, Commodore Format was even sillier. They had 2 tapes, one containing a graphic adventure creation set. Paradroid publishers 21st Century were clearly having a tidy up, because they gave Mission Impossible and Head the Ball to CF as well, the pair sitting alongside demos for First Samurai and Creatures 2. So, including the construction set, that's the best part of £80 worth of games, a deep creative app, and 3 demos for spending £7 on some magazines. Who's spending twice that on a new retail game and risking getting Cisco Heat? Idiots, that's who. It gave the 8-bit software market a quicker death than Commodore Power. Which is a shame, really. Because your Commodore, YC, Commodore Power, Flopsy the Wonder magazine, whatever it's called at the time, it's been a joy uncovering a short-lived gem this month. 66 episodes in, there's not much I don't have at least a passing familiarity with. So thanks again to David Mulcreast for pointing it out, and in advance for not complaining about how I pronounce his surname. On the back page, the Commodore Format archive. All our direct quotes from Rick are from an excellent interview on there, but they are a superb treasure trove for information about probably the C64's greatest magazine. Sorry, Zap fans. From interviews with key figures, news on the C64 scene, and excellent articles on both the issues and cover tapes of the magazine itself, you can get lost for 4 weeks very easily. Make sure you keep it to that though, because Yesterzine returns the last week of July for more magazine-based shenanigans. We'll see you then.